Right. Well, thank you so much, Louis, for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So, Louis Chan, you are the director of Stationery, which won the
Mm-hmm.
Audience Award at the last Emerging Filmmakers Night live streamed event. First of all, how was it taking part in a live streamed film event? How was the experience for you?
It was interesting. You know, I think I had a bit of training because we had been part of one called a Thames Famalam Film Fest 2 days before that, which was similar, although they used a different kind of software, that kind of stuff. But the principle was very similar. So that was good because I don't know how well I would have done, because I was worried about being queued in, because I knew I had to do a Q&A afterwards and stuff, and I didn't want them to see me sort of eating cereal or something. So yeah, but no, it was great. It was great in terms of the immediate sort of interaction you can have with people who are viewing, and they can ask you questions, that kind of thing. So you get it takes away that filter or that buffer, you know. And people, you know, it's quite funny when people are on a keyboard, almost you could think that maybe they're actually more honest than they would be if they're in front of you and they're in the audience, and you know, they say, oh, great film, but really as soon as you leave, they're kind of like, oh yeah, it was all right.
Well, as a matter of fact, was there any comment on the night or any questions that someone put to you that you thought were quite interesting or you hadn't had before?
The questions that I got were mainly sort of from the EFN sort of side, which were a bit more sort of introspective, and you know, I can talk about this stuff for days really. So I enjoyed it a lot, but it was nice seeing a few sort of little comments here, just, you know, asking, you know, how did you do this, or what was the writing process, and that kind of stuff. So that was nice. Although I think I only had a certain amount of words that I could respond, where I wanted to respond more fully, put it that way.
So just very briefly, could you go over the premise of the film and where the idea came from and where you were at in your filmmaker's career when you decided to make it?
I wanted to create a story about two old friends with a lot of history and a difficult past. But the actual nucleus of the story sort of came from a friend actually telling me his experience of being arrested. And sort of the things that he was up to were very similar to the characters in the story, drug dealing. And years later we had this conversation, and he was telling me sort of how he was worried that it might affect the course of the rest of his life. And I thought that was really interesting, how one sort of defining moment could do that. You know, it's an interesting sort of concept of you being viewed as an adult the moment you become 18 years old, as opposed to 17 and 364 days, you know, something like that. So he said it was a very sort of traumatic and scarring incident. You know, you're treated as an adult, you're essentially still a kid, at least in my eyes. And he just sort of looked at it and said, you know, things could have gone, you know, completely the other way, if I hadn't been lucky, because he managed to you know, not get tried in a way where they could have, you know, prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But it was sort of that wake-up call that I think that he needed to sort of set himself on the right path. So that was kind of the origin of the story. And then I thought, imagine if it was actually split into two characters, and one side was the university sort of side, and the other side was the side that was still sort of linked to what he was doing before, and these different values of ethics and what is right and perception. So that's kind of where it came from, and it became really interesting once you start attributing specific personality traits to each different character, even though in reality it's the same person, and you start building from there. That's where it became sort of quite interesting for me with what you can do, because I really didn't want the story to be something about antagonists and protagonists. I really wanted them both to be protagonists who have a clear opinion, right or wrong, and it's up for us to decide as an audience on who we think is right. And that's the kind of stuff that an event like EFN is great for, because you can get those immediate reactions from people who can side with one person or side with the other, or they understand both sides, but hopefully there's a discussion that comes out of that. So I think I've answered maybe like half of your question. I don't know. Could you remind me of what the other one?
No. It makes me, well, it's made me think of another question actually. The friend who told you the story, did he watch the film?
Yeah, well, I had to, you know,
Yeah.
I definitely had to let him know from the moment when I sort of came up with the idea, because it does stick quite closely to the truth. you know, certain lines like, oh, you know what the police paint on the ceiling of your cell? They paint a window with, you know, hills and sunshine, and that was and a number which was essentially beneath that image, sort of saying, obviously the cell has no windows, which I think it said, if you have committed any other crimes, here's the number that you should call. And I just found that so twistedly manipulative. And imagine you're an 18-year-old kid, and, you know, what does that make you think of yourself? So of course I told him, and I told him what I was doing, and that I would, you know, treat it very sort of sensitively. But I was obviously very apprehensive of, if I'm going to do this, you know, it just gives you added impetus to tell it the right way, because it's something which is very personal to me, and it's about a topic that I care about, but more importantly, someone I care about. So yeah.
And one thing that the commenters and just the viewers commented a lot about was the strength of the actor's performance. So can you tell us a bit more about the casting process and the type of work you did with the actors?
Sure. Okay, so I mentioned a little bit about it the other day, but I didn't actually get onto the second part. I said how we got a casting director or a casting agent involved, who was a family friend who gave me this list, and I asked her who I should, you know, keep an eye out for if I ever get the chance of, you know, meeting them, or if they come in for an audition. And that name was Rebecca Morel, who ended up being the Che character, one of our leads. And she was brilliant. But the other side of the casting process was, I didn't know any casting directors or people or companies, and no one knows who I am and all that stuff. So it's very hard to kind of get access to these kind of people. But I posted up on this public Facebook group called Film London Connect, which you may have heard of. And I just posted up pretty sort of candidly, I'm looking for a casting director or anybody who might know someone who would be interested in helping me out with this short film I'm making. A few people got back, but one lady, Claire Oxley, came back and said, "Oh, you should talk to this woman at Hammond and Cox Casting. They might be able to help you out." So I went to them. And I said who put me in touch, and, you know, what my story was and stuff. And they said, "What's your budget?" And I said, "Very small." And they said, "Right, well, I can't give you what we'd normally do. But what I can do is, based off of the script," because I sent them the script, and I think the big key here was that they liked the script. You know, if they didn't like it, I don't think they would have helped me out at all, personally, as nice as they are. But they liked the script, and they said, "What we can do is we can sort of be the go-between for you and the actors. So instead of Louis Chen, random director, contacting their agents and agencies and stuff, it's going through a professional agency, and it just makes it look that much more formal." Again, we're talking about perception, aren't we? So they helped out a lot, and it wasn't just that. They gave us access to their facilities. They gave us access to obviously a lot of their contacts, and we were able to workshop in their offices, where they have specifically designed rooms with screens around and props and all kinds of things. So I can't really thank them enough.
Can you tell us a bit more about the location? Where did you decide to shoot the film? And
Yeah. So I'm from Northwest London, so the Kensal Rise, Queen's Park, Kilburn kind of area, massively gentrified in recent times, which isn't the Kensal Rise I sort of grew up knowing. So I wanted to set a film in this area, because, you know, if you look at Top Boy and all these other shows that are doing great things, it's very much East London, Hackney, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, yo, man, where are our films? So I wanted it to be something there. And also because I know the area so well, I'd be able to get around from a logistical sense. If we had, you know, moving vans and crew and stuff, I know the area, I know which roads we can drive down, which ones we can't, all that kind of stuff. And so from a practical level, it was helpful as well. But we filmed in a road just off of Kilburn High Road, which the Gino character references in the film. So it's almost very much, you know, where it was supposed to be. But we had 2 or 3 different options, but we picked a road which had a dead end. And we picked that road specifically because we knew there wouldn't be that many cars driving down it. The other side, one side of the road were businesses, the other side were council estates, which worked well for our story. And the businesses, because it was a weekend, those would all be empty, so we wouldn't have too much trouble from sort of locals or people sort of looking around and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's how people do when they see big cameras and stuff. So that was why we chose that location. But we had a big problem when it came to mains power supply, because we would have had to hire a generator, which, 1, is super loud and can affect your sound, and 2, super costly. So in the end, my producer and I ended up knocking on doors at the 11th hour, sort of begging people for us to let us use their plug in the wall in the corridor. And after getting chased off of some people's front doorsteps a few times, a kind soul said, "Yeah, you can do that if you make a little contribution towards our garden fund," which we gladly did.
Was
So yeah.
when did you shoot it? If you don't mind me asking, what?
We shot on the 13th of July 2018.
Right.
13th of July, I think. Yeah, I remember because it was the World Cup final.
Oh, that's brave, being outdoors.
Well, we didn't know that England were going to get so far, and also we'd planned the date months and months in advance, so we weren't really thinking about the World Cup. But what it did mean was that everybody was indoors, so that was kind of cool.
You've timed it well.
We got lucky. I'd love to take credit for that, but yeah, no, we planned weeks and weeks and weeks in advance, and there were certain friends I was trying to ask to help out, drive stuff or just generally help out on set. They were like, "No way, mate! It's the World Cup final. What are you talking about?" I was like, "Yeah, fair enough." I was actually kind of glad that England didn't make the final, because if I had missed it, England might never do that again, and I was making a short film, which I would have done, which I would have had to do, but I would have been torn. Oh God, sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
So, can you tell us a bit more about your work as a filmmaker? What got you into filmmaking in the first place?
I think I was always kind of into it, not necessarily in a filmmaking way, if that makes sense. As a little kid, I was always with my Legos making little stories and scenarios and what they do, and every time I'd go and play with them, it would be a different kind of story. And my dad, he used to record endless amounts of VHS movies off of the TV. So I just had stacks and stacks and stacks of old 80s and 90s movies, which I would watch repeatedly, religiously over every weekend. So I'd probably say that's kind of the formative years of necessarily of where that came from. But I've always loved. I studied English literature and film, and I kind of knew I wanted to go in that world of narrative and drama. And at the start, it was kind of let me just make a go, make a go of it. And then from graduating from university, I founded my own production company, because I wasn't able to get an internship with any companies. So I thought the best way to learn is to go out and do it yourself. Which so one of my uni friends and I, we collaborated. We set up our own company called Fresh Look Films, which is still operating under that name. But so we did that, and we would shoot our own stuff, and then we would then work as freelancers on much bigger shoots as camera operators or editors or assistant directors. And gradually you start building up contacts, and obviously the most important thing, you learn more. You learn more from other people. You learn their good habits. You learn their bad habits, and then you take that and discard what you don't need. So that's kind of how we got into it, and still plugging along.
So when you set up the production company in the early days, how did you find making films? What did you use? What sort of equipment did you manage to get? Did you draw on favors from people? How did that work?
Super basic. I think the first thing that we used, this is fresh out of uni, I think we both had a pair of 550D cameras, and my business partner Kobi and I, we got involved with charities quite a lot, but this is through his contacts, and so we would film things with them, and they had quite a lot of access to quite prominent names like Plan B and people like that. So we would go and film a lot of their events, and I think at that time, this is around 2013, people weren't necessarily using content in the same way that they do now, where it's almost like a necessity. It sounds weird because it's only 7 years ago, and people will certainly do it, but not at the level, whereas now it's very much you have to. So we would sort of go in there, and either we would do it for free or we would do it for very little money, and we would churn out things quickly. I think that was what was good about us, that because we were so small, it's just us two, we could both do both things. If Kobe was shooting, then I would edit. If I was shooting, he would edit or direct, and so on and so forth. And then sort of it gradually sort of got bigger from there, very much sort of a word of mouth kind of thing. And we we started getting in sort of more kit and things like that, or we would start working on shoots with collaborators or friends of ours who own their own kit. And when I'm saying their own kit, I mean things like a higher level, Canon C range cameras, C100s, C300s. Another friend has a Red, and then you start, once you use that once, it's kind of like you can't downgrade after that. That's what's expected. So so you got to by hook or crook sort of find a way. So yeah, definitely favors were called in.
So when was stationery made in regards to the rest of your work? What had you done previously in terms of filmmaking?
Sure. Well, I directed my first short film once I finished university in 2014 called Pastiche, which is a very sort of like low budget. I almost consider that film like my film school, because it was, again, Kobe and I, my business partner, doing pretty much everything. And when I say that, I don't mean that to boast. I mean, I was directing while I was holding the boom, and all those kind of things. And Kobe was the DOP, and just really, going out and going to slam poetry events and talking to people there who we thought might want to be in the film. So everything. And that was a big learning process. So I did that, and then with the company, we started doing a lot of, I'd say, corporate stuff, but then also a lot of interview kind of format with some fairly sort of prominent footballers, and so that gave us quite a lot of, I don't want to say pull, a bit more pull, let's say, because we had these big names on our website all of a sudden, and people had sort of heard of us. And then we managed to get an interview with Davido, the Afrobeats artist, when he did an interview with Samuel Eto'o, the former Barcelona and Chelsea player. So that was like a crossover, the two generations meeting, like the old guard and the new kid on the block. And so that I think we managed to get quite a few views, about 500,000 views on that one. So that helped us quite a lot. But then from there, I generally just sort of jumped on projects that were interesting to me. So if it wasn't commercial stuff, which was to earn money and earn a living, it was working on projects which people would present to me, which had a story. And one of those was Ilya, the documentary I directed about 2-3 years ago in Iran. It's all based in a specific area in Tehran called Shahreh, and we filmed over there for about 10 days. And this was through someone, again, it's a very sort of convoluted story, but I ended up directing and editing this. And that was a really cool sort of project, because it was something and about a place that I knew very, very little about. So I had to do a lot of research. It was about the Afghan community specifically in that area in Iran. So it's like, it's three-layered of my ignorance on these subjects. So that was a big learning curve for me. Again, it was all in Farsi and Afghan Farsi as well, which is completely different. So there was a lot to do, but that was great. I think that was the first project that I really worked on that I was very emotionally attached to.
There's mention of it on your Vimeo. Am I right, Ilya?
Yeah, no, it's on there. You can watch it. Right, people can watch it right now if they want.
I had a look, and I was quite intrigued by what got you involved in that project in the first place. Is it? Do you have any sort of, I guess, cultural or ethnic ties to
No,
that part
no.
of the world, or not at all?
The story is that I used to be a football coach when I was 16 to about 18, before I went off to uni, 16 to 19. And one of my former pupils, let's say, that sounds so weird, he's Iranian. He's half Iranian. And I coached him when he was 14. And then by the time he was 20, I was 26, 27, he said that he's gotten involved with this charity called the Popli Khalatbari Charitable Foundation. And they do these fundraisers every year. But he wanted to include football as an initiative over there for the Afghan kids who were part of this school, but also this foundation that sort of supports them, because they are not necessarily recognized by the state. So things like healthcare and education, they don't really get too much support for that. So he wanted to do that. So Tariq Ben Brahim is the huge sort of driving force behind that whole project. I was kind of the mercenary who was sort of brought in, who knew what he was doing in terms of filmmaking. And he asked me if I wanted to get involved, and he showed me some really cool sort of footage that he'd filmed over there with the DOP François Duchâtenay. And I checked it out, and I was like, wow, this footage is really, really good. And then I said yes.
So now that's, you've made stationery and you're in a new phase of your career, I guess. What are your future projects, at least for the coming months, given the situation?
Yeah, the coming months, God knows, right? I mean, I just finished directing my first thing for the BBC in partnership with the BBC Writers' Room. So that was really cool. It was a short thing, just a 1-minute comedy sketch, but it was nice to sort of do that and have that experience. So that will be coming out later this year. So that's something that I'm working on right now, which was good to get it all done just before lockdown happened. And I'm also writing a feature film which I'm in the process of developing. You know, the first draft is done, but sort of working relatively consistently on getting it to where it needs to be, and have had a bit of interest from a few production companies for that project, but as well a mini series which I've also been developing and writing at the same time. So it's those two main projects that I'm focusing on. But at the same time, if there's a short film that, you know, a writer's written, I want to work with writers as a director on something I haven't written is what I want to do. That's the next step for me as well. That's a big sort of milestone I want to do, because I think it's harder to do that. And so I want to see what I'm made of.